Hi everyone, I'm Karthika. I'm a research fellow at the Georgia Institute of Global Health, but at the India office, not the Imperial one. And this is our research. It's a qualitative study to understand women's lived experiences and adaptation strategies of pregnant women in Gurugram, India. This is part of a broader research that we are doing, funded by the Wellcome Trust, which is called Heat in Pregnancy in India. So in 2024, which was last year, India recorded over 700 heat-related deaths. These were the numbers that were given by the government. There's also unrecorded numbers that we can't officially account for. But we know, and literature shows, heat does not impact everyone equally, especially when we account for pregnant women in India. The impact of heat, especially on pregnant women, we believe is trifold for initially. And this stems from the physiological fact that they are pregnant. Pregnancy itself causes 20% increase in metabolic heat load. It shifts sweating and vasodilation in the body itself. And overall, there's an increased daily water need that pregnant women need. Secondly, when you look at structural and gender vulnerability, especially for women in India, often these women live in single-room homes which are poorly ventilated and trap heat. Gendered and cultural norms restrict cooling options. And like we said, we've been hearing about this. 90% of women, especially in India, work in informal sector. That essentially means that they have limited protection against heat and also labor laws. Finally, when we look at policies, my colleague is here. We have done a huge review looking at how policies account for pregnant women in India. And what we found out was that maternal health systems, especially antenatal care, often overlook heat as a burden and a determinant. And heat action plans in India do exist, but they are limited in scope and very, very short term. Not only that, heat policies itself don't account for lived experience. So what does that mean for pregnant women and how do we protect them? I think it initially stems from the fact that we need to understand their lived experience in the sense that we want to know how they live in heat currently and what are the different things they do to undertake or adapt to heat with the limited amount of resources that they have. And in India, currently, there's limited evidence that showcase how pregnant women actually experience or adapt to heat. There is an upcoming quantitative evidence, but qualitative research, especially in this area, is very, very limited. So that goes to our research objectives. We look to gain insights into heat adaptations among pregnant women, especially during the antenatal period, in one of our study sites, which is Gurugram, India. For a bit of context, Gurugram is near the national capital, which is Delhi. And Gurugram is a bit of a tale of two cities, in the sense that it is home to almost 250 Fortune 500 companies, but it is also very poor at the same time. For our methodology in Gurugram, we took an exploratory study design with convenient sampling of the pregnant women from our prospective study, which is part of the Heat in Pregnancy program. We use a socio-ecological framework to guide our methodology, but once we started working on it, we realized intersectionality also plays a huge part here. These are the different methodologies we took for the study itself, primarily revolving around in-depth interviews with the participants itself, key informant interviews with the husbands, focus group discussions with community health workers, also known as ASHA workers in India. And we also conducted a policy roundtable, and along with a desk review that my colleague was presenting earlier. All right, inclusion and exclusion criteria, very simple. The participant had to be part of the Heat in Pregnancy India study and should be able to provide consent, and preferably, we were hoping that they belong to some form of socioeconomically disadvantaged group so we could have some adequate representation. While doing our sample selection, we realized that our participants from the prospective cohort belong to three forms of housing. One is called the JJ clusters, and the second one is a single room with shared toilets that essentially mean like a floor would have 5 to 6 rooms, roughly around 10 into 10 feet, with 3 or 4 families sharing one single toilet. And the final one would be like a single room unit with a single toilet that would accommodate the family itself. And these are of varying rents. So what we ended up doing was looking at the pregnant women from the prospective cohort. All of them were potential participants for the qualitative research. And using our 3 housing criteria, we were able to somehow equitably distribute the pregnant women across the 3 trimesters. And we also looked at the husbands who were potentially interested to be key informants, and we also did focus group discussions with the ASHA workers. So our results. Our participant profile with most commonly revolved around participants being really young, around 23 years old, often school educated, meaning that they finished up to 12th grade, and mostly Hindu in religion. Their per capita income was around 80 US dollars, which was very less. And if you looked at the earlier slide, they were paying almost half of their income for just rent. And most of them were not working in the sense that they were at home doing homework or house caring jobs overall. And when you looked at migration, a lot of them were part of nuclear families, very few with joint families. And at Gurugram itself, for an average, they had stayed for 1.5 years. So when we asked the participants on how do you feel about living in a city like Gurugram, often the participants said that it was incredibly dense, it was really, really dirty compared to their homes, and it was really expensive for them to survive in a city like Gurugram. And that second photo is actually one of the participants' homes. And these participants often said that it was really overcrowded to live in that building. It was incredibly suffocating in the building itself and also amongst the people that were living there. And the pregnant women also said that they had limited control in not only mobility within the building, but also what they could do with the city itself. When we looked at how they attributed heat, often they came up with bodily symptoms with words like thakan, which meant like constant tiredness, and fatigue, with chakkar, which means dizziness, and dam gutna, which is a feeling of breathlessness. And emotional well-being, when we looked at that, they often said they were irritated, anxious, barely able to sleep through the night. And because these were migrant women, they often complained of loneliness as well. When we also looked at why they assumed that this was the case in Gurugram, they often attributed it to the loss of trees and green cover in Gurugram. A lot of women said there were more and more people here every day. It's crowded everywhere, and that's why the heat feels much worse too. And those who were able to live in Gurugram for more than 3 years, they were able to say that it wasn't this hot before. This year is much hotter than it was the year before. So when we looked at the varied lived experiences, we were able to categorize these pregnant women into 3 basic groups. The first one being the newly migrant women who had barely just gotten married a few months ago and had just moved into the city maybe 3-4 months back and were still experiencing Gurugram as a new place. They had often an immense amount of household burden. They were new to the city, so had a lot of mobility restrictions with the husband saying, "Oh, please don't go, it's a bit scary outside." And also, they experienced resource scarcity. They didn't know what to do in the city of Gurugram, where to get water, where to get food, where to get cooling access resources. The second part was women who had settled in Gurugram a bit more, maybe 1 year, 2 years. Their household burdens was a bit decreased because they were seeking help from their neighbors. Mobility restriction, not so much. They were getting familiar with Gurugram as a city. And resource scarcity was they were using shared cooling spaces, maybe a cooler or a fridge in the same area. And finally, we have the locally rooted, or people who were born in Gurugram and they were married into the community. Their household burden was similar because they're women. They had no option but not to take care of the household burden. Mobility, not so much. They were able to freely move around, if not within the community at least. And resource scarcity, not so much. They were able to share their resources with their maternal homes if they were nearby. But when you look at their heat experience, all of them were experiencing the same form of heat. They were experiencing discomfort, feeling of inescapability from heat. Often women said that मैं यहाँ से छोड़ के नहीं जा सकती हूँ, which just meant that they cannot leave from this place even if they wanted to. And also, regardless of where they came from, all of them were attributing to the fact that there was just increased urbanization and just poor resource and that they could access to. When you look at their similarities, all of them looked at the same thing, the fact that the environment itself was polluted, there was absence of community spaces or sparks for them to use, and their gendered care responsibilities were incredibly high, especially if they were really near to maternal homes or their husbands' families were nearby. And one of the key starting facts about Gurugram is the fact that there's poor outreach from services, especially governmental services, and that also reflected in the participants themselves when they said What will I ask from the government, or what they can only provide us things if they wanted to? When you look at how they cope with heat, we mapped it to different kinds of things that they could do. For example, food and drinks. Often they weren't able to know what was cooling, although there are traditional practices and knowledge that's available that we know and we do speak about colloquially. They were not, and not only that, because they were poor, they weren't able to afford and consume a lot of these things. Lemon water, access to cooling resources and fans. The most common was wetting the floor, and they used to wear lighter clothes if the men weren't around in the house. But all of them came with constraints, with high electricity bills, poor public transport limiting mobility, even if they wanted to escape the heat, and also just poor advisories for pregnant women and heat action plans. What does that mean? Essentially, it means that coping, especially for pregnant women, is costly, it's fragmented, and completely gender bound. It is experience for them through isolation. Care networks, if they exist, are a double-edged sword. Because they're poor, it creates poverty heat traps for them, and also there's a weak presence of state, and which also increases individualized burden. So these are recommendations. Obviously, it sounds like a laundry list of things, but this is what we think that we can potentially start. We do believe that it's important to equip these women with practical heat and health and a bit of agency as well. We should mobilize families to try to reduce the exposure and engage, especially spouses for new migrants, to redistribute tasks so they can rest and move freely, build community-level cooling ecosystems, and also try to embed maternal health risk in policy and urban systems as well. A lot of research challenges came up with difficult stakeholder engagement in Gurugram. Like Laurie had previously said, there's little to no NGO presence in Gurugram. It's almost difficult to get anyone who was ready to say anything or comment anything about Gurugram itself. And obviously, these are pregnant women trapped in like 10 by 10 feet rooms. It's very hard to get them into a private space and try to get what we want from them in terms of data. And our limitations, heat is very dynamic, it's time variable. What is at 10 a.m. may not be at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. Again, because what we're doing is part of a larger study. We weren't able to get a bit of privacy as much as we would like to. And obviously there's recall bias, which we all know. These are future directions. We have a lot of work that is underway in the coming few years. We're looking at peri-urban and urban areas. We're also hoping to track longitudinally pregnancy and lactation effects with respect to heat. And it's just also to co-design heat and health intervention. And that's our tiny team that we have. And thank you, Rhea.